Story 1. If you're like me, you come into adulthood thinking that everyone on average is mostly good people. Many more people than I expected were very selfish, and they take more than they give in every aspect of their lives. Story 2. People who think fighting is never a possibility and that those who have gotten into fights did something wrong. You've never lived in a ghetto if you've never gotten into a random fight. Yes, diffusion can work. Yes, you can sometimes get out of the situation. Some people are willing to chase you and ruin their lives over some petty nonsense. This is why you can find videos of sheltered people getting beaten up after trying to talk it out with someone. Again, some people aren't trying to talk. That's not to say you shouldn't try to avoid fighting. I just think that knowing how to swing a punch could save you. Story 3. They seem unafraid of the random life meteors that can appear and absolutely crush your life. They are just a little too confident that you cannot have an endless stream of bad luck. They believe deep down that they are, in some way, untouchable. Story 4. Their secure attachment style. My husband is very normal. I have an anxious or ambivalent attachment style and constantly feel like relationships around me are being threatened. Him? He couldn't care less. He never questions if his parents could abandon him or treat him differently from his siblings. He just says, and if they do? Mom. Story 5. I met a girl who was 26 and was genuinely surprised to find out that not everyone is a Christian and not everyone voted for Trump. She comes from a very rich, sheltered family. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "You don't believe in Jesus?" Story 6. They believe people are generally good and look out for the general well-being of fellow humans. They have issues believing others' traumas because people cannot be that bad to each other. Story 7. They don't have heightened awareness when out in public or generally lack street smarts. That instinct has saved me on many occasions. They'll walk into areas or down streets anyone else would know not to, and then either face the consequences or someone kind will tell them to get out before something happens. Story 8. Not understanding how much or how easy one can lie, getting mad when they realize the other is lying and want them to stop. It's kind of hard to not subconsciously lie if lying has saved you a lot growing up. For example, lying by saying you like something when you hate it, just so that you won't get hit or scolded or guilt-tripped for saying your real opinion. Story 9. They are happy with their mediocre results. No perfectionism and super high self-standards, no being afraid of what other people will think, no sitting paralyzed by a low-stakes task that, in theory, should be easy for them. Story 10. People who say you have to love your family no matter what. Please, live with my mother for 18 years and see if you still feel the same. And my mother wasn't even nearly as bad as some others out there. Story 11. If they are very overconfident, to me, that is a sign that they probably had very few hurdles growing up. Maybe it was pretty privilege, maybe they were coddled by their parents, had a solid friend circle, and so on. There are people who become overconfident because they developed that through some sort of social hierarchy. Maybe they are skilled in their field or very talented at something, but I find the former reason to be more common. Story 12. They have never had to think about different versions of some event to tell people. They do not have a work version, a family version, a friend version, a real version, or a therapy version. They just say whatever the thing was that happened, regardless of who loses their composure and what happens, and it is chaos. Story 13. Hot take. On the negative side, some of them do not have much empathy because they have never experienced emotional pain. More often than not, I feel people who have a mean streak had a life where they were loved and pampered. The theory that bullies have a bad family life does not seem to be really right. Another quality is they are usually very happy with societal norms, religion, and culture, maybe because it never came in the way of their happy living. Story 14. He walks around with no consideration of the route and will leave his phone on the rail when dining on a patio. Also pulls out his wad of cash to pay without worrying about anyone seeing it. Also carries a wad of cash. Story 15. They struggle to process in times of crisis. My veteran friends and I have all talked about the people who reach out to us for some type of reassurance when things are going wrong, especially post-September 11 and during the COVID-19 pandemic. None of us were equipped to talk about COVID-19 or lockdown procedures, but people wanted to get some type of reassurance from us. There is an inability to acknowledge that there are bad people in the world who hate them and would kill them if given the opportunity for no reason other than what they represent. We see a lot of this after every terrorist activity. People just can't process it. There is also class or status guilt. Some people are very aware of all the privileges they have and how easy they've had it, and they assume that everyone who looks like them or that they have some similarities to has had it just as easy. They want everyone in that status to make up for it. Story 16. Just ask your parents. They'll help you cover rent, buy groceries, give well-adjusted life advice without re-traumatizing you. Like, no, they will not. Story 17. No one walking the earth is completely undamaged, but a good sign they have had a minimal amount is if they still have a loving relationship with their parents well into adulthood. Story 18. But they are family. It never occurs to them that not only do you not have to love a family member, but it's your right to have nothing to do with them. Story 19. No slight to them, however, when someone complains about mundane issues, for example, what most might consider minor inconvenience may totally ruin their day consistently. Day after day, something like people walking down the street and how they smell, look, or move, traffic, or how things are said. A lack of knowledge of others. We get damaged in life and we should learn, adapt, and overcome. Story 20. Coming from my years of retail, being stunned by rudeness, harassment, and shoplifting. Just the general idea that people will be cruel and crude with no provocation, or people will just take things. The idea of people not following societal rules is mind-boggling. Story 21. Zero resilience. Resilience builds through difficulty. When something does happen, it is devastating for them. Also lacks situational awareness. People who have experienced abuse have great instincts because they have learned how to sense a mood change through subtle signs. Story 22. Sharing. I found, in my experience, that the people who were the most willing to share were the people who had nothing but the clothes on their back and the bag they were carrying. Those were the ones that clothed and fed me when I had nothing myself. But oddly, the undamaged ones, in my experience, were always very reluctant to share. I think because they always assumed everyone around them either had as much as they did or enough. I think it was more naivety than selfishness. Story 23. They have trouble processing that not everything can be fixed or even helped. When they hear someone has a problem, they want to help so badly, and they seem to not understand and get frustrated by the fact that sometimes they can't. I feel like I know people who have grown apart over an illness or hardship, and it's because the person without the problem is uncomfortable coexisting with a problem they can't change. Story 24. They have a hard time understanding abuse, especially emotional and psychological. They know it happens, but it's something they haven't had to give much thought to. I've had a couple of well-meaning friends from loving, happy families ask me why I don't try to fix things with my family. They genuinely cannot fathom a world where someone's family relationships have resulted in irreparable damage. On a slightly lighter note, it was a friend's mother from one of those families who finally validated the feelings I had for most of my life and let me know that what was happening to me was not normal or okay. Story 25. There's a certain naivete. They still think the world is black and white, the good guys will win, and the powers that be will do the right thing if it's pointed out. Story 26. They act all surprised that you've never been to Disneyland. What? But that's like a rite of passage, right? I went there the first time when I was too young to even remember it. Story 27. When they cannot understand why you have not just forgiven your crazy siblings with borderline personality disorder and narcissism. Trying to tell someone innocent the things my siblings and their significant others have done, and they refuse to believe there are people like that in the world. I envy them their inexperience. Story 28. Because being rich and privileged means someone has not had any trauma? What does undamaged life even mean, let alone purely? How completely simplistic. Nonsense post. Story 29. I realized lately I have this sense of scarcity. I want to save and hoard and not use too much of something or spend too much, etc. I was with a coworker last night at an event and we had giveaways for kids. I was thinking subliminally not to give kids more than one of anything, and she was encouraging them to take what they like. This is absolutely a trauma response from my chaotic upbringing. Story 30. In adulthood, they panic over every little pang of pain and then develop health anxiety when they are diagnosed with something common because, as a child, they never so much as broke a bone. Smee, I have bad health anxiety. Story 31. They react really strongly when you mention something bad that happened to you. Like they just can't believe someone could have a bad thing happen to them and still go on living life and having fun. Story 32. Debating which socks last the longest. Mind you, I work 40 hours a week on my feet with Walmart or Ross socks, and there is a debate about whether Nike or other overrated brands are better. Story 33. I had a friend who was genuinely confused when I described anxiety. They said they had never experienced anything like that. I told them that it's like talking on stage in front of a group of strangers, but it's constant, and you're not in front of strangers most of the time. They did not get it at all. Story 34. Speaking for myself, not understanding death. I never got it. I do now, but I was in college before I ever did. Even my dog, whom I literally never remember not having until we had to put her down, lived until 19. I lost my biological grandpa at 3, but my grandma remarried before any of that sank in. So, as far as I'm concerned, I didn't experience death until my great-grandpa died in college. And I never knew how privileged I was. I grew up in a town with all of my extended family. We were close, and I never realized how rare that was either. So I was a bit ignorant about life and honestly still am. So, anyone reading this and relating at all, cherish it. Reach out. I wish I did. And reach out if you need anything. Story 35. They miss small signs of being a sometimes previously abused victim. They fail to empathize or understand your struggles or pain, or they believe you are exaggerating. It is easier to recognize someone else's struggles when they are your own as well. Those who fail to notice seem relatively undamaged, I think. Story 36. Carelessness. If you've never had anything go wrong, you won't even think to prepare for the worst. The worse you've been through, the more prepared you'll feel the need to be. It's the same as being a kid. They don't have the life experience to really understand why they shouldn't, say, play in the middle of the street or look both ways before crossing, because that sort of fear hasn't had a chance to enter their lives. They don't really understand that they or someone they love might die or have something horrible happen to them. They don't understand that there are consequences, so they act like there aren't any. Story 37. Young woman I know comes from a very loving family. Not well-to-do, definite struggles at times, but they all come together and support. She married a man who did not have a family like that, and had a very hard time believing the things she talked about until they got serious and he experienced it. In their wedding vows, he actually said something about wanting to build a family like hers. Story 38. I hate to say it, but spoiled behavior. I had a friend who was given everything in life. Meals were cooked for him even as an adult, his family paid for a vehicle for him, they gave him a house too. They were not rich by any means. They were just lucky. But getting to know him was realizing how much of a spoiled brat he was. When things wouldn't go his way, he would manipulate you and nearly throw a tantrum. I remember putting my foot down over an issue, and he actually looked like he was going to cry. We were 25. His parents never telling him no, and enabling him made him a terrible friend. Granted, he hid it well. But since learning, I parted ways with him. Good riddance. Story 39. As someone with this privilege, probably having a great relationship with family, also having zero anxiety. Also, every rich privileged person I have met has terrible mental and family issues, so I don't know how this correlates. Story 40. I know someone who thinks everyone can just get financial help from their parents for anything. You want to have a wedding? Your parents will help. You want to buy a house? Your parents will help. Budgeting error? Your parents will help. The number of times I've had to explain that not everyone's parents are in a financial position to support in that way. They live in a whole other world. Story 41. They have anxiety, and the slightest stupid thing will set them off in a panic attack. You don't have an anxiety disorder. You're just used to things being easy and don't know how to respond to the smallest piece of adversity. I have found that survivors of trauma tend to have an extraordinary amount of patience and insight. Story 42. I feel there is no such thing as an undamaged life. Everyone is broken. We cannot be so quick to assume that the people around us are not going through their own forms of adversity. Story 43. If they trust you enough, they are open to honestly telling you about anything and everything they have experienced. They try not to contradict themselves or act against their principal morals and values. Story 44. A healthy relationship with parents and siblings, especially a parental relationship they can look up to and aspire to. My relationship with my parents and siblings is fine, but there is some trauma there with my dad being a disciplinarian. There are times I literally cried in front of friends due to bad academics. The relationship my parents have is not something I aspire to as well. My mom is a traditional wife, and I just don't know if my dad ever cared to let her pursue certain ambitions that maybe her parents blocked her from. This isn't to say my parents were extraordinarily awful people. They were just really strict. A traditional wife is pretty common in South Asian households anyway, and also in super conservative areas. But a person I met, their parents' relationship is great. Their parents have great conversations. Both parents had their own life ambitions. This person is very open about their life with their parents. They even told me their parents have the type of relationship they want. I have a wall between my parents and myself. They don't know how many relationships I've had. They don't know that I've smoked marijuana. Not that it's a big deal. The only thing they know is that I occasionally drink alcohol. I was in my 30s when I found out my sister drinks wine and has a wine bottle at their place. I don't particularly see my life as this heavily damaged thing. What I experienced is what I assume most South Asian kids experience growing up until I met this person. I'm sure they face certain adversities in their life in various ways, but their interpersonal relationships are solid and something I wish I had. I'm not complaining too much. I have my friends who will sit with me when I go through tough times, and I'll drop everything to help them if needed. But man, good for that person.